Welcome back. You are watching News Center. With less than 2 weeks to go for the G20 summit in Delhi, China has released their 2023 edition of its standard map, asserting territorial claims over Arunachal Pradesh and Aksai Chin in Ladakh. In the latest edition of the standard map, China has also included the disputed South China Sea and Taiwan. The map was released by China's Ministry of Natural Resources. The Indian government has lodged a strong protest against China, saying that their claims have no basis. The Foreign Ministry has called the situation absurd and has said that China has complicated the possibility of a resolution between the two nations. To discuss that and more, we're now joined by Ambassador KC Singh, former Indian envoy, and Ananth Krishnan, China correspondent at The Hindu. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador KC Singh, how do you read this Chinese strategy? This has been done before, showing Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh, Aksai Chin as parts of China. But doing this just ahead of the G20 summit, also after an informal meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi, what is China trying to send out as a message?
I don't think there's anything surprising in this. If you see what happened after the Bali meeting, because India said last year after Bali encounter that there was no meeting with the Chinese president. Then a few months ago, the Chinese let it be known that yes, there was a meeting and we agreed to improve relations. Then India was embarrassed and we had to come out later and say, yeah, there was more than just a handshake. Some kind of an exchange was there. So Chinese have been trying to keep their leg on top. Now, when we went for BRICS, it was clear that the Chinese wanted an expansion. They and the Russians want to use this platform to create a kind of a riposte, a response to what they think are G7 and instruments that the West and the Americans control. Now, once we knew that, the only negotiating element that we had was the expansion, whether we delayed it or we got what we wanted. But by the look of it, even though they said earlier that there'll be a criterion and criteria will be known, we'll make it known, there's no such criteria which was explained. If you take Ethiopia and you don't take Nigeria, and if you don't take Indonesia, then what is the criteria? You're not looking at the most populous nation, you're not looking at the most important nation in that area. You're looking for, this is my guy. So Chinese brought the Iranians in. And the fact that the Iranian president thanked President Xi and was not thanking anybody else very clearly showed that they thought that it's the Chinese who have got them in. And with the Iranians there, you're giving it a certain slant because they are very much more in the corner of the Chinese and the Russians. And I think the next mistake was when after the meeting, the foreign secretary briefed and said a decision has been taken to send down instructions to the officials to resolve the issue. And the Chinese, in their statement, said, it's the Indian side that wanted a meeting. They didn't talk about any instructions. So that was again a warning signal that the Chinese are not on board. They're playing their own game. So the map is only the next step in that. Now, very clearly, they are not very happy with India getting all the attention with G20. They would like to rain on your parade if they can, directly or indirectly. I don't think President Xi will boycott the meeting. He will probably come. But he wants to come after making a point that, you know, the Chinese are not going to be pushed. They think it should be any bilateral issues need to be resolved on their terms. And therefore, if India wants to play the game, then do it according to the Chinese.
That's a very important point. China, Xi Jinping wanting to keep India on the edge just before the G20 summit. Ananth Krishnan, coming to you, we've not got a confirmation from President Xi as yet on whether he will attend the G20 summit or not. What is the significance of this recent exercise, this release of the standard map? How significant is this when it comes to claims on Indian territory, on South China Sea? Is there any difference between the strategy now and earlier?
I think, Parikshit, it really is unhelpful, and I think the Ministry of External Affairs did the absolutely correct thing by raising a very strong protest with China. I think it also isn't very helpful that today, again, China doubled down on the map and actually asked India to, as their foreign ministry spokesperson put it, to stay calm and not overinterpret. I don't think that's something that Delhi will really appreciate. At the same time, Parikshit, I'm not entirely sure that this is something that is directed only at India or the G20. And I say this because, as you hinted in your question as well, it's something that a lot of China's other neighbors as well are going to take issue with, specifically regarding those that are involved in the South China Sea dispute. And I think that while it's not, I think the timing with the G20 might be coincidental. I think it does point to a broader change, Parikshit, which we should pay attention to, which is that even if China's territorial claims in the map aren't new, what I think has changed in the Xi Jinping period is that we've seen this emphasis on national sovereignty in domestic Chinese politics. We saw that with the new border law that was passed last year. And one of the articles of the border law, and I think that's related to this map, calls on every government department in China at every level to sort of create public awareness about China's borders and to ensure everyone in China is on the same page. So there's a lot of domestic political messaging here. And I think the worrying thing is Beijing framing these disputes that are to be negotiated with countries, the disputes that China has several agreements with India with and commitments to India. But these things seem to be taking second fiddle to Beijing at the moment, which is framing everything as matters of sovereignty that can't really be questioned by other countries. And I think that kind of explains why you're seeing China take actions at the LAC and other theaters as well. And that, Parikshit, I think is something new we've seen in the last couple of years.
Right. Ambassador K.C. Singh, speaking about national sovereignty, as Anant was pointing out, Ambassador K.C. Singh, this is an important issue in the context of G20 as well. We've been trying to build consensus on the communique, especially on the wording of the Ukraine war. And so far, China and Russia have been resisting any attempts to strongly condemn the war or Russia's war effort against Ukraine. Is this a message from China that it will be unrelenting in its support for Russia during the G20 Leaders Summit on the 9th and 10th of September?
Well, obviously, it's not the first time. There is the Bali wording. They've been resisting it. And very clearly, the Chinese are in the Russian corner, or the Russians are in the Chinese corner. And the Chinese have been helping them all through the war effort. China is quite happy the way things are. It keeps the Europeans and the Americans tied down in Europe. And they can continue to saber rattle as far as Taiwan is concerned. They don't want the Russians to back off, but nor do they want Russians to face a defeat and to pull back. So they'll give that much of help, which doesn't provoke their interlocutors in Europe, but at the same time keeps Russia afloat and dependent on them. And now they are kind of leading, and it's the Russians who are kind of tagging along. And that's why BRICS was important, because BRICS was where they're trying to shape a new order, a new platform, which they and the Russians can use. Therefore, when we say, the Indian side said, this will add to multipolarity with the 6 new members coming in, that's a mistaken notion. Multipolarity assumed that there are 2 poles. But in this case, you've gone and joined one of the poles, and you're strengthening one of the poles. So there is no multipolarity. Multipolarity will be if you're strengthening institutions which didn't have China and Russia in it, because that is the new pole, and there's no denying it. And that's the new bipolar order. So therefore, this, I think, should have been anticipated. I feel it was a mistake to seek a meeting with Xi, if the Chinese are to be believed, or meet him. It should have been anticipated that when there is time pressure, the Chinese knew you need a success on LAC more than the Chinese need it. Although Chinese have a slowing economy, they also are resorting to nationalism and national sovereignty issues, and therefore the distraction. But India also has a Lok Sabha election coming up. And, you know, nationalism and national sovereignty is a very big thing for BJP. So the Chinese know it, and they're playing it. And you needed a success before G20. And when you negotiate with time pressure, with the other side knowing that you have time constraints, it's like the Americans telling the Taliban, hey, you know, we're going to fight you, but we'll pull out at the end of the year. That means the Taliban will just, you know, play the clock and wait it out for you. So it's a much more complex situation than it was before we started talking.
Anant, do you also feel that the recent meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi did not go well? Both sides said that it was the other side which asked for the meeting. India has said there cannot be resumption of bilateral relations till the time the border dispute is resolved. Now we have the map issue coming in. And really, at the G20, we want the G20 to be successful. We want consensus on major issues like debt restructuring, digital public infrastructure, also reform of multilateral development banks. And we need China's support on many of these issues. You cannot solve global problems without China being on the table. So does this complicate matters for India at the G20?
No, you're absolutely right, Parikshit. I think that what happened at BRICS on the sidelines kind of pointed to how I think both sides to some degree are looking at one-upmanship rather than, trying to figure out a way for the two leaders to sit and meet, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, as it would give Prime Minister Modi the chance to convey directly to President Xi what India has been saying for the last 2-3 years, which is he needs to tell his military to restore India's patrolling rights in no uncertain terms, or the relationship will continue as it is at the moment. And I think that meeting him directly is one way for India to do it. But obviously at BRICS, what happened was, I think China kind of mischievously put out a statement saying India requested this informal conversation, which was partly true. But then India clarified that China requested a bilateral meeting, which India rejected. And I think that little snapshot shows where the relationship is at the moment, and not in a very good place. And I think the new map underlines that, Parikshit, because it tells us that even if both sides are able to make some headway on some of the specific issues on the LAC and disengage at least one of the two remaining friction points, I think it's not going to solve larger issues that both countries are facing with, including on the border. I think it's a structural issue in the relationship, and I think we will see a more confrontational relationship for the time being, especially what we've seen, as we spoke earlier, Parikshit, as well, the last 2-3 years under Xi, the way they've looked at China's territorial disputes, and the way they expect countries to play by what China expects without showing the same sensitivities. As long as that trend continues, Parikshit, I wouldn't be holding my breath to see a major change in the frosty relationship we have with China that we've seen in the last couple of years.
Right. Ambassador KC Singh, last question to you. If Xi Jinping confirms his participation and ends up coming to the G20, how much support do you think we will have on our core agenda? It is often said that China does not want to be isolated or the only person in the room to deny or decline something. Do you think on some of the critical issues, China will end up supporting, even if there is no support on the wording on the Ukraine war?
No, Ukraine is not because of India. Ukraine is very clearly, they are supporting the Russians. And therefore, they'll be consistent. I don't think it's an India-China issue. On many issues, on climate change, this and that, the Chinese are on board. Where they support a particular issue, they'll support it not because India is asking them to. It's because they are on that particular issue. They have a position on, Bretton Woods institutions, on IMF, World Bank, etc., development, Global South. They'll make all those noises, but they are also looking for leadership of Global South. And they feel that they are a pole now, and they want more people in their corner. So on those issues, they will take a stand. That's why I'm saying he will come, because he doesn't want to make it seem like, he's run away because he has a problem with India. He'll come here because he'll meet Biden, he'll meet the other leaders, etc. But he wants to, as far as India is concerned, tell them that, listen, these are our red lines, and we are not going to, give you an out on it just because, you're unhappy with it. And therefore, this is in the long run. Look, Kissinger has said something very, very interesting once. He says, symmetry is a very dangerous thing. Symmetry is the last stage you go to the topmost level. He says, because if you disagree at the topmost level, there is no other level to go to. Therefore, the meeting should have been prepared for by the foreign minister, by the others. The top leaders should have only met not to break the ice, but once you were sure that the Chinese are ready to break the ice. If they were not ready, they should have just shaken hands and given them a miss and done the same in Delhi.
Okay. Right. Thanks for putting that into context for our viewers, Ambassador KC Singh, and many thanks to Anand Krishnan also for joining us and telling us about the Chinese strategy here. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of News Center. More news and updates continue right here.